everyone. My name is Kate Blosveren. I just want to start by saying thank you to APEC and to all of you. This has been a tremendous experience for me, my first time in Taiwan, my first time in Asia, so really an honor and very excited to speak to you all today about career and technical education in the United States. What's really struck me listening to all the other countries speak about their vocational technical education systems and the challenges and the trends is, although the language might be a little different that we use, the similarities abound as far as the challenges and the ways that we're really trying to look at our system to make it more flexible, to make it more efficient, to make it work for students and for our economies. So I represent the National Association of State Directors of Career and Technical Education Consortium. The name is what it suggests. We are a non-governmental organization that represents state governmental leaders within the career and technical education field. We represent the state leaders from all 50 states as well as the other U.S. territories in Washington, D.C. as far as their interest in Congress, the Department of Education, as well as providing direct advocacy support, relationship building to really be a strong advocate for high quality CTE across the entire nation. Two of the ways that we do this, and I'm going to speak to two of these initiatives, are we manage the National Career Clusters Framework, which I'll come back to, as well as the Common Career Technical Core, a new set of CTE standards. So I just wanted to start with how we define career and technical education. I'll speak later about why it's career and technical education, not vocational technical education. That's a very intentional rebranding effort. But we call, or I will say CTE from now on, education programs and experiences that provide students the academic, technical, and employability knowledge and skills that prepares them for the career of their choice. This is delivered in a variety of ways, in a very diverse set of opportunities at the K-12 system through comprehensive high schools, CTE focused schools such as career academies, area technical schools that serve high school students as well as post-secondary and adult learners, community colleges, technical colleges, and everything in between. What we really focus on though within CTE is the grades 9 through 14. So really focusing on the high school and then the post-secondary opportunities that are less than a 4-year bachelor's degree. So CTE in the US, just to give you a sense of the scope, we have about 12.5 million students that are participating in CTE at the secondary and post-secondary level. Post-secondary is a little harder to identify. These are actually students that are participating in CTE programs that receive federal funds. So there are certainly more people, particularly at the post-secondary level, that are getting CTE-like training in other private institutions. This is really focusing on the public system. Of that, it's, as you can see, 7.5 million are at the secondary level. This represents about half of all students enrolled in grades 9 through 12 in the US. And then we have a little over 5 million what we call concentrators. And those are students that are taking a 2, 3, or 4 course sequence that is a focused set of curriculum in a specific career area. This is obviously a number we want to get much higher. We, as others have suggested, are really trying to increase enrollment in CT and really believe that all students would benefit from this type of education and experiences. Just to give you a sense of what areas students are concentrating on, these are our 16 career clusters. I'm going to come back to this framework later, but just to give you a sense of where those concentrators are spending their time. At the secondary level, you can see it's fairly distributed across the career cluster. Some are obviously more popular than others. At the post-secondary level, it's very heavily concentrated in health science, which is obviously one of the fastest growing sectors within the United States and elsewhere, as well as in business management and administration, a very common set of programs that are held at community colleges, as well as law, public safety, corrections, and security. Just a bit about how CTE is governed or led. As with all policies in in the United States. We have a federal level, we have a state level, and we have a local level. It's generally very decentralized, as again, most policies are within the US. There is a major piece of federal legislation that provides a little over $1 billion of funding at the secondary and post-secondary level, and sets broad requirements of what sort of minimum requirements for CT programs, as well as a number of reporting requirements. From that really pushes down to the states that actually develop the plans. They set the agenda of how they're interpreting the federal policy, as well as other major stakeholders or leaders at the state level, from governors, state boards of education, state legislatures, that also develop policies and practices that inform and guide CT. And then implementation really happens at the local level, districts, schools, institutions of higher education. So one of the major reform efforts that really is sort of lighting up the US right now and really reshaping how we think about and deliver education is what we call the College and Career Ready agenda. And this is really about ensuring that all students have a foundational knowledge and skills necessary to be successful in life after high school, regardless of what that education and training after high school is. And what the shift here is that instead of, this is the anchor for K-12 education, really thinking about what are those skills you need after school, both the academic as well as technical employability, and backmapping those into the earlier grades, versus the traditional way that K-12 is organized, which is sort of just thinking from a grade-by-grade progression. This is really a shift. And this is a real boon, I think, for CTE as being a key player in this. And so the drivers of this college career agenda are that increasingly, numbers are between 2/3 and 80% of jobs require some education and training beyond high school. So there are jobs that do not require education and training beyond high school, but these are low-skill jobs that do not pay a family-sustaining wage, do not offer pathways to advancement, do not offer benefits or any real reliability. So because of this upskilling, because of this additional requirements in academic and technical skills and knowledge, the line between these skills are being blurred. There's a growing recognition that you need a strong academic foundation to succeed in technical jobs. There's a growing recognition that many of these technical skills, or the academics, could be reinforced by the learning of technical, and that employability skills cannot be taught in a vacuum, but need to be taught within the context of focusing on academic and technical skills. And the last piece of this is that efforts to support college readiness and career readiness are mutually reinforcing, because what it all comes down to is making sure that our students, our adults, have a high quality career that offers great opportunities and lifelong learning. The final piece of this is, and really one of the reasons that CT is growing in such high visibility in the US and a high level of interest, is what we call the skills mismatch, or might be called the skills gap, which is, even though our unemployment remains relatively high, and that our unemployment rate does not include those that are underemployed, which is a major issue coming out of the last recession, where people are overqualified for the jobs they're taking, as well as a pretty high number of Americans that have just stopped looking for work, that are not counted in our unemployment figures, is we still have quite a few jobs open. And we have many employers saying that they are keeping jobs open longer than they want to because they are not finding individuals with the right skills. And this is right where CT comes in, because when we've surveyed employers about what the jobs are hardest to fill, by and large, these are jobs that CT is very much focused on. The skilled trades, information technology, which we know is both a growing industry in itself, but also embedded in every single sector in new, increasing ways that no one ever imagined. Accounting and finance, technicians, and mechanics. So I mentioned earlier that we have an intentional shift away from vocational education to career and technical education, in part because there is a real stigma, and I think this is in part because we're further along in vocational education was the nomenclature used for so many years, that it really carries a stigma of something that is outdated and outmoded. So it's both a rebranding, but also really a reform of the entire field in a couple of meaningful ways. So historically, vocational education was for a few students. those students, the students that were not going to college, students that were not academically prepared or we didn't think could be academically prepared. Today, CTE is for all students. It used to really focus on a few jobs in a handful of program areas. It was plumbing, electricians, the skilled trades. And now the CTE framework and the career cluster framework that I'll show in a moment addresses the entire world of work and really encompasses preparation for any and all careers. Historically, vocational education was in lieu of academics. Either you went to college or you went to trade school. And now, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of effort to really integrate the academics and technical learning, in part because of those increased skills and education and training requirements and demands by employers, but also just because we know it's the right thing for kids, for leaving all options open for them. Historically, it was high school focused and terminal. You went through high school, you earned, you became that skilled worker, you went into a job and you stayed there for the rest of your life. We know that is not how the economy works anymore. We are preparing lifelong learners, and so a big part of the shift is really building strong linkages between high schools and post-secondary institutions. So I'm next going to talk about really where we've gone and where we're going, and laying out what the vision of CTE is for the United States. Back in 2010, leaders from all 50 states came together to develop and release a new vision of CTE in this paper. And I have about 20 copies of this with me, so if anybody wants one, first come, first serve. So in this paper, we laid out 5 principles for what CTE can and should be to meet its promise for students, for employers, for our economy, for our society. And under each of those principles, which I'll walk through, we have a couple of sort of promises that we make and a number of actions that we've committed to taking as an association, but also as an entire field. So the first principle is that CTE is critical to ensuring the United States leads in global competitiveness. And this is contingent on the fact that we see CTE as the linchpin between education, workforce development, and economic development in a way that no other sector of education, no other program can really bring all these players, the programs, the policies, the practice together. This is also contingent on having high quality, rigorous standards undergirding the whole system. The second principle is about actively partnering with employers. Employers are business and industry are critical for setting expectations, for anchoring the system, making sure that what students are learning is relevant, is rigorous, and is going to prepare them for that work. It's also about providing the really critical work-based learning opportunities, both for students, but also for teachers, and getting them to really have a sense of what is going on through externships and other opportunities. Many of our CT teachers do come from industry, but when they leave industry behind, as we have discussed, industry is very fast moving, and so really providing that regular, ongoing, strong partnership. We call them co-investment. Is what we really want, is business to be co-invested in the system because it's absolutely working for them. The third principle, which I touched on earlier, is that CT prepares students to succeed in further education and careers. This is really about leaving all doors open, all opportunities on the table for students, and realizing that it can't be career ready or college ready, but that it's really one and the same. The fourth principle is around the delivery of CT through comprehensive programs of study that are aligned to the National Career Clusters framework. So this is really about moving away from traditional vocational education that was very occupationally focused, those one-off or two-off classes that got you the skills in a vacuum and then put you into the workforce to stay, and really moving towards providing a broader what we call a program of study, which is really a sequence of experiences of courses that starts broad with career exploration, moves into the industry-specific skills, and then over time progresses into the career pathway and those occupational specific skills. But has those on and off ramps for students that really make sure that they are on the right path versus putting them on a path that they really can't get off, which is, again, historically how CT was structured in the US. And finally, the last principle is that CT is a results-driven system that demonstrates a positive return on investment. And this is all about making sure that we are investing in high quality CT programs, we're investing in efficient programs, ones that meet students' needs and that meet employers' needs, and having the data behind that to really make sure that we are investing in the right programs in the right communities. I know I'm already like out of time, so I'll move quickly through these. So as I mentioned, the Common Career Technical Core, or I mentioned earlier under the first principle that in order for CT to be successful, to meet these promises, it needs to be based on high quality standards. So right now in the US, we have a lot of standards. This comes back to a very decentralized system. And what we have is a little bit of chaos. We have state standards, we have local standards, we have standards created by industry associations, we have standards for credentials, we have standards for certifications, we have standards for licensures. We have standards for everything. And when you actually look at a program, it varies very much from state to state, from district to district, from program area to program area. So what we tried to do as an organization and in partnership with 42 states was actually develop a set of standards that are not meant to replace any of those standards, but rather serve as benchmark standards that really can be used to bring some order to that chaos. And what's important about these is that they're benchmark standards. Again, they're not curricular standards. They're meant to be at the end of a program of studies, at the end of a student completing their pathway. These are the absolute things they should know and be able to do within each of these areas. So there are two components of the CCTC. I'll just go through them. First, there are content standards for the 16 career clusters. And I mentioned these earlier. So this is a framework that's been around in one form or another in the US since the 1970s. And really was a way of trying to wrap our arms around what area, how should we be focusing the CTE, how should we be bringing all the different stakeholders together to understand what it can and cannot be. And so this is the version that's been around for the past 10, 15 years or so, and essentially what this represents is the entire world of work. This is meant to be very much a sector-focused that provides really the industry, the broader recognition under each of these clusters. Under each cluster are then pathways. And the notion is the cluster is the broad, right, overview. It gives you the career exploration. It makes you understand what that industry is about. And then once you move past that level, that sort of is your first exposure, you then move into your career pathways. Importantly, the career pathways are not intended to be occupationally specific. They're still specialization, but within each of these pathways, students can still go into a lot of different directions. Right? There are a lot of jobs that come out of these. So as one example, under agriculture career cluster, there are 7 pathways, and you can see how different these are. But again, under animal systems, you can be everything from a veterinarian to a vet tech, and anything in between. In addition, the other component of these standards are a set of career ready practices. And these are meant to be the cross-cutting skills that any student within CTE, but honestly any student and learner and employee that we may have should be able to possess and demonstrate these skills to be career ready. So here, I'm not going to read them to you. Here's the other 6. And they echo a lot of the things we've been hearing and talking about all day. So I've mentioned programs of study a couple of times, and this is probably the other really big trend and really big shift within CT. And again, I've alluded to it, but this was a new requirement set by that federal policy I mentioned earlier, that every local recipient of funds needed to have at least one program of study. We are hoping that in the next reauthorization of Perkins, which was due a year ago, that we will actually move to just investing in this type of program. And what a program of study is, briefly, is a non-duplicative set of academic and technical courses that bridges both secondary and post-secondary, that leads to post-secondary credit, certificate, industry-recognized credential, and/or post-secondary degree as appropriate. So that's a lot of fancy way for saying what I'm going to now try to show you what this looks like in reality. So here are 2 programs of study that I actually pulled directly from a state. These actually exist. And what they are, as you can see, they are a sequence of courses that start at high school but include post-secondary. And you can see that, that level 1, health science education, well, that is a great, to make sure that if you enter that, if you decide I don't like health science, you can very easily get off that ramp and go into another one. It doesn't just immediately put you into that occupational training. It gives you the opportunity to really, students to diagnose what they want to do and what they don't want to do, which is equally important for CTEs, not just preparing individuals for a job, but making sure before they invest more in their education that they're on the right path, not the wrong path. So this, as a program of study, you can see it has courses that also count towards general education courses for sort of double dipping. It has work-based learning opportunities. It has opportunities for students at the secondary level to earn post-secondary credits, what we call dual enrollment. And then importantly, it has a number of entry points, right? You could start at the beginning of high school. You could start once you enter post-secondary. Sorry about my upside down entry point. And then it also has sort of a number of what you could call exit points, but I didn't, and purposely, because there are a number of certifications along the way, as well as degrees. I think I'm pretty much out of time, but my last point is, so in the last year, my organization actually, once we released the CCTC, we conducted a study, the first ever, where we collected every single state-developed and state-approved set of CT standards at the secondary and post-secondary level, as well as sort of all of the policies that wrap around and impact the implementation of standards, and compare them to the Common Career Technical Course. So this is the first time ever that somebody had benchmarked all of these standards to really understand what was going on, at least at the state level. And what we found is many things we knew, some things surprising. CT is very diverse. Welcome to America. There's not even a shared definition of what a standard is. Some places it's curriculum, some places it's course level, some places they don't have standards, really quite a variety. I'm going to skip ahead too, that most state standards that we did find are very occupationally specific. They skip over those career practices, they skip over the broader career exploration skills that are at the career cluster level and get right to the occupational specific level. So what we found is there was a pretty big mismatch, a disconnect, or misalignment between our standards, which again are very rigorous, high level, and meant to be after a student has completed a full sequence of courses, and what states are requiring students to complete within their CT programs. So this doesn't mean that their standards are bad or that they're low level. It just means that they're missing some of those other components that we think are really important to advancing and getting more students engaged in CT and really helping it make sure it's preparing students for the full world of work. So a couple of challenges to leave on in the US system. One is the diversity of our system, which I've mentioned a couple of times. And this is both a strength and a challenge. I mean, we have some amazing programs across the 50 states and all the districts. We have best practices and pockets of excellence, but it really limits our ability to compare, to scale, to do some really fundamental changes with being so decentralized. Competing priorities is certainly a big one. You know, coming out of the recession, budgets are very tight. I mentioned our federal policy is up for reauthorization. Actually, every federal education policy is up for reauthorization. So there's a lot of, even though there's a lot of interest from the president, from Congress, from state leaders around CT, it's really competing with a lot of other really high priority areas in education and outside of education. The stigma remains of, we may now call it CT, we may have some really great high quality innovative work, but there are many, many parents out there who still do not think that is the right path for their students and think it has to be 4-year degree or nothing. So that is an uphill battle. The implementation of standards and program of study with fidelity, and the with fidelity is really the important point there. It's, you know, it's one thing to adopt standards and adopt a policy. It's another thing to really make that really systematic change, especially given the gap between what the state can require, but the implementation that really happens at the local level. And then the just ongoing disconnect between secondary and post-secondary, which is a fundamental challenge. I don't know to talk about it too much, but much like the misalignment or the alignment dilemma between post-secondary and our employers, we have a equally misalignment between our secondary and post-secondary systems, which is really going to be critical to advance our system. So with that, I am done. Thank you all. I look forward to answering your questions, and I will pass it back.